Hello. Our story begins inside of the Jedi Temple hangar bay, where Anakin Skywalker came rushing out to stop the Jedi Counselors from going across the city to confront the evil Chancellor of the Republic. Mace told Kit Fisto, Agan Kolar, and Saesee Tiin to go ahead of him, and they did. Windu had left Shaak Ti behind to defend the temple with Sindralic, and he was preparing to make sure that Anakin remained behind as well. Skywalker told Mace that he had learned a terrible truth about Palpatine. He was the Sith Lord. Mace turned back, as if he and the rest of the council didn't believe Palpatine was already that, and questioned, a Sith Lord? Anakin agreed with hesitancy in his voice. He needed Palpatine alive, but he also trusted the Jedi more than he did the individual he was taught to hate his entire life. These weren't just Jedi teachings, these were life experiences. His first encounter with a Sith, up until his most recent one, were all confirmations of the Jedi teachings. Maul tried to run him over, then killed Qui-Gon. Dooku betrayed the Jedi and almost killed both he and his master, and then removed his forearm and tried to kill as many people as he could think of. There was so much to uncover about Dooku, but in the meantime, Skywalker was insistent that he be able to join Mace and the rest of the Jedi. It was his duty to be there. Mace and he walked across the floors of the hangar bay until they got to the Republic gunship and stopped. Master Windu could sense the conflict within Anakin, and believed full-heartedly that he would be a danger to not just himself, but those around him. Mace needed able-bodied Jedi with him, and he believed that those joining him were mentally strong and sound enough. Anakin was the true question in all of this, so he told Skywalker to remain in the council chambers until they returned. Mace was really hoping that this would work. He thought that by having Anakin wait in the council chambers, it would signify that he would see the rank of Master once their mission was over and done with. The council had agreed on this notion, and with Skywalker finishing his mission, Mace planned to bestow him the title of Master. Anakin rejected this immediately though, which did perturb the Master of the Order. Skywalker then reached out and grabbed Mace's shoulder, which was a bit of a shock to Mace. Anakin told him that he learned of something else, and Mace looked back to his peers already in the gunship, before turning back fully to face Skywalker. Anakin, in an almost whispering voice, told Master Windu that there was another Sith that was referenced. Apparently, a Sith student had killed him in his sleep, but it was Darth Plagueis the Wise. Did Mace know about this Sith? He paused for a moment and looked across the city skyline. The sun was preparing to set, and the lights of the city were sprouting awake. He held his breath and then asked, Plagueis the Wise? Anakin nodded his head and released his hand from Mace's shoulder. Windu stepped towards Anakin and told him that Plagueis was not an ancient Sith. In the Bay Knight line of Sith, there had to have been a long line of masters and apprentices. However, he doubted that this specific Sith mentioned by Palpatine was ancient or older than the last century by any means. Anakin asked why, and Mace told him to define the context of which this story was brought to him. Skywalker quickly covered the main details he remembered, the most important of which being that Plagueis could save others from death. Mace paused again and tapped his chin with his hand. As he paced away and turned towards the LAAT, he called in, asking if they knew of Plagueis the Wise. All three shook their heads. Mace nodded and walked up to Skywalker, as he suggested that he might indeed get his chance to be a part of an action. Anakin got a little antsy, excited for his opportunity to help. He felt true fear of Padme's life because of what Palpatine said. He was going to make sure he paid for that, at least in his mind right now. Mace told Skywalker that there was a planet out in the Outer Rim called Crayus II. It had been a part of the ancient Sith Empire for thousands of years. In the middle of the ancient Sith grounds, there was a large obelisk, one that had something hidden underneath it. The Sith had used this planet for its ritualistic significance. If there was a Sith Lord capable of saving others from death, chances are they were able to cultivate the powers of the dark side to do it on Crayus II. Anakin asked if it were possible that Plagueis was still alive, and Mace nodded his head, expressing that he was about to get to that part. He told Anakin that he was needed for this mission, and he could not travel alone. About 4,000 years ago, Jedi Knight Vara Nareem traveled to the world to learn secrets of the Sith Temple. The Sith spirits had trapped her on the planet after killing her. Anakin was to take a squad of Jedi Knights to investigate the ancient grounds of the Sith. If Plagueis was indeed Palpatine's master, then chances are he could have survived and retreated to Crayus II. Anakin asked Mace how he could be sure, and he explained as quickly and as concisely as possible. If Palpatine gloated about the death of Plagueis the Wise, then he killed him. However, if this mysterious Sith Lord was capable of saving others from death, then don't you think he would like to hide information from Palpatine? Information like saving himself from death? Why risk yourself when your treacherous student was starting a war, rising to power within the Senate and turning the galaxy against itself? Mace told Anakin to see the vision. Plagueis could be lurking out in the Outer Rim, waiting to pounce. He ordered Skywalker to go to Jocasta Nu for the coordinates, take a squad of Jedi Knights with him, supplied by Master Sindralic, and protect the galaxy from a potential Sith uprising. This was his destiny. If he were the chosen one, then this would fulfill the prophecy. Anakin was so enamored with the words Mace said that he didn't even consider what leaving Coruscant meant for him. He watched Mace step into the LAAT as he told Skywalker to go swiftly and wishing that the Force guide him and his brothers and sisters on their expedition. Skywalker nodded and ran back through the hangar bay. He would run in the Sindralic on his way to the archives, and the Battle Master would assemble a squad of Jedi for him before he returned. Skywalker would also get information on Plagueis II from Jocasta Nu. She was curious as to why he needed these coordinates, and once she heard what Mace told Anakin, she understood. Everything was ready to go as Skywalker whipped across the halls of the temple and found himself inside the hangar bay with the rest of the Jedi Knights. Sindralic introduced them quickly by name and wished them well. An old Poland 717 class shuttle was docked on the bay. Anakin asked if the ship were safe to use, and Sindralic nodded his head. It was a well-manufactured vehicle, and all the parts were changed out every few years. The maintenance on the Polans were perfect. They just didn't get used all too frequently. But this ship was necessary for Skywalker. It was the largest vessel they currently had inside the temple, and he had a good 20 or so Jedi joining him on this mission. Sin wished Skywalker luck on his journey, informing him that the planet he was going to was deadly. He and his squad would fare well if they stayed together. Anakin bowed respectfully and rushed in. There was already a pilot in the seat of the ship, and she lifted off and pulled around, leaving for the atmosphere. It wasn't until the ship jumped into hyperspace that a wave of shock rolled over Anakin's body. He had just been sent as far away from Padme as possible. Did he just doom her to death? He couldn't believe it. In a similar manner to how he would have completely neglected the fact that Palpatine tried to get Padme killed a dozen times during the war, inside the council chambers, he was completely distracted by Mace's new directive, that he hadn't even considered the fact that he was being sent away from Padme. Mace used the right words to embolden his ego, suggesting that by doing this he would fulfill the prophecy. It was the fact that he was the only one who could do it, and he needed to go, that Anakin was pulled in. As he sat inside the ship realizing that he'd just abandoned Padme, he tried to get his mind off of it, as he moved to the bay of the ship with the pilot. All the Jedi gathered around as a hologram turned on. Anakin looked at it for a second time, as Jocasta had shown him most of what was visible near the obelisk over the ancient ruins. He expressed that they were searching Plagueis II for a potential Sith Lord. This was going to be a challenging mission, regardless if the Sith was alive or not. This would require strength of mind, strength of spirit, and strength of heart. Plagueis the Wise could be here on this planet, and it was their job to make sure he was defeated and or captured. The Jedi watched the hologram as Anakin BS'd his way through everything. He didn't honestly know how to conduct this mission. They were all going in pretty much blind. What really started to bother Anakin though was the fact that he couldn't get something out of his mind. Palpatine kept speaking to him. These weren't memories either. These were new sentences and statements that he hadn't ever heard before. After Anakin finished his little briefing, he sat inside the meditation chamber inside the Poland 717. These vessels were big and he was able to hunker down and think quietly to himself. He needed to find his peace, and he was struggling to find any remnant of it. The words of Palpatine were seeping deep into his soul, but there wasn't anything for him to do about it. On Coruscant, the Jedi Counselors were walking through the doors of the executive building. This was their moment to defeat the Sith. Before they walked into Palpatine's office, Mace received a transmission informing him that Skywalker's squad had departed from Coruscant. This gave the Jedi Master a reason to pause. Something was off here. While Anakin was young and relatively inexperienced, this Sith Lord was getting into his head. He told the Jedi around him that if they felt anything mentally, they needed to stop it. This Sith Lord would try any number of tricks to try and get them killed. He reminded them to not let a riddle, a question, or a thought plague them from defeating this enemy. They had to win here, or their brothers and sisters as well as the rest of the galaxy would be put into dire circumstances. They all nodded their heads, and they approached the clerk in front of Palpatine's office. Inside of the hyperspace routes leading towards Plagueis II, Anakin left the meditation chambers and found himself speaking to the other Jedi with him. He didn't have much to say, but they were questioning him. What did he know about Plagueis the Wise? How old could he be? What else was alluded to when he learned of this tale? Many of these Jedi, even those older than Anakin, looked up to him. He was the hero of the Republic. His name was plastered all across Republic territory, so of course they were going to show some sort of interest in what he had to say. Skywalker was appreciative of their warm embrace of him. It helped him snap out of his dreary thoughts surrounding the situation with Padme. But after he left the meditation room inside the shuttle, the voice of Palpatine stopped. He didn't know what this meant, but he knew that once it got out of his head, things started to change. He felt a bit better talking to these other Jedi Knights. He actually became more expressive and joyful the more he kept talking to them, which was proof of his change in emotions. Back on Coruscant, inside the executive chambers, Kit Fisto was flung into the wall, where Saesee slid his lightsaber in front of him, protecting Fisto from a strike that would have ended him. Mace jabbed in, with Kohler slapping his lightsaber over Palpatine's strike, just hitting the edge of the weapon. Sidious had attempted to put the riddle into their heads, but it failed, and now he was on the run. He leapt across the room before Fisto used the Force to fling him into another wall. The Jedi rushed to cut him off from escaping, which Anakin was able to do as he was kicked backwards into the main section of the Chancellor's room. He landed steadily as Sidious smacked a blade backwards to defend himself from Saesee, before pushing his hand outwards and dragging another saber out of a Sith relic in the room and igniting it. He ducked out of the way as he used both of his Sith weapons to defend himself from his 4 opponents. Palpatine tried to put a riddle into their heads and it clearly did not work out, so now he was left with nothing to use against his enemies. The suggestion given by Mace seemed to work, and now he had all of his allies with him, even despite the Sith House surprising them. Their lightsabers all collided. Now that they were 4 Jedi Masters fully functioning, Sidious had to be at his best, but it was nearly impossible. He realized that he doubted the abilities of the High Council, especially those of Master Windu. Something about his specific attacks made him impossible to break through. Because Sidious was fending off all the Jedi at the same time, he couldn't really figure out what was making Mace such a fierce combatant. This squad of Jedi Masters weren't just High Council members, they were all best friends, which meant they had accompanied each other on a series of missions throughout their careers, and they knew how to best surround and defeat any enemy. While Palpatine was fighting for survival and looking for an escape route, the Jedi were trapping him. Saesee and Anakin had the back, covering the large window in the back of the room. Anakin was covering the escape route to the office they just came from. Kit was the floater, and Mace was defending the door, because it was the easiest way to get out and get reinforcements. The Jedi continued to box Palpatine in, and no matter his remarkable skill, all of his strength and power showed their weaknesses here. He showed why he feared fighting Plagueis in a one-on-one engagement. He proved not only to the Jedi but to himself that only through his mind was he an equal opponent. Sidious fired electricity at Saesee, hoping to break free and go out the window, but Fisto floated in and blocked the electricity, giving Saesee a chance to slam the weapon against Palpatine's. He slipped back, spinning around to stop Mace before jabbing at Anakin, where he was slashed across the wrist by Fisto, who continued floating around him. The 3 Jedi pressed in and Palpatine leapt into the air, where all the Jedi used their powers to smash him across the air and into the wall. He crashed down and got up to his feet in time to stop Fisto from landing the killing blow. Mace was in next as he body-checked Sidious, giving his brothers a chance to tug and pull. Their blades cut through his body as he fell apart. Now came the real challenge, explaining their actions to the Republic, now without a leader. On Kreis 2, the Jedi Knights followed Anakin out to the ancient grounds of the Sith. They were hopeful to find something or anything, but they found only one tall obelisk in the middle of a flat surface. There was moss covering everything on the platform, and the words inscribed in the once pristine monument of the Sith were covered. The Jedi fanned out, per Skywalker's orders, as he walked up to it and used the Force to clear some weeds and plants in the way. He scanned the words and tried to read it, as one of the knights more proficient in this style of script joined him. It said something about this being a resting place of the Sith Empire, a dead sect, one meant to be forgotten and one to die off. The Jedi explained to Anakin that this obelisk was not made out of a promise for the future, rather an end of the Sith altogether. This confused Skywalker, but he saw a series of caves up ahead, and suggested that they leave the platform alone and split up into groups of 5 to investigate each of these caves. The Jedi all agreed and continued on. After several hours, there were no answers and no Plagueis. Then it hit him. Anakin realized that Plagueis was never going to be here realistically. Perhaps there was a chance, but Mace knew those odds were slim to none. This was a distraction. Anakin realized he left Padme behind, but he didn't realize he had been completely duped. He couldn't tell the other Jedi that, so he had to wait impatiently until they finished their investigation so that they could return to Coruscant. All the reports that they could make about this location were made, and they left. Upon their homecoming, there'd be much change. Skywalker would go to confront the council with frustration and anger, but before he could say a single word, the rank of Master would be his. It was said by Master Yoda over hologram that these moments right now would simply become sentences in the books of history. He expressed pride in Skywalker for his trust in Master Windu, as it had gifted the Jedi and the Republic a place in the future of the galaxy. The trust the Council now collectively shared for Anakin was the gift it needed to be able to trust him with the rank of Master. Due to having to report on his Craes 2 mission first, he would learn of everything, and how he would be exempt now from the governmental process of clearing up what the Jedi had done, and of course the extremely bland rebuilding of democracy. Mace had played 4D chess, and Anakin was only now catching up. But what he thought would be an anger-filled council session was one that finished with a sense of completion and fulfillment, feelings that would be mutually shared between himself, his family, and the galaxy for the next 25 years. Skywalker's children were all grown up by this point. The Republic and Order had shifted. The galaxy itself was looking into the future. Anakin was a part of the Jedi Resurgence, as it was now being dubbed. But like Yoda said, years of his life were nothing more than sentences in the books of history. Since the end of the Clone War, the Republic fortified itself. Another internal check was thrown at the Jedi, but they moved past it and rose above it, distancing themselves from the Republic after the M-count bill was established. All it was is it stopped any individuals with an M-count over 5,000 from becoming Senator, Representative, or Chancellor. It was the last bill the Jedi had any influence over, as they completely separated themselves from the government, as they should have been. Yoda in the years since passed away, but his legacy lived on. The new Grand Master, Plo Koon, was fulfilling the needs of the Order, as before Yoda died, he started the Resurgence. New outposts filled the outer edge of the galaxy. While the Jedi were no longer close in ties with the government, the 2 terms of Chancellor Amidala helped fund the Jedi Resurgence. Amidala put forward bills that supported the Jedi in their involvement in external matters, without Republic oversight or bills. Padme wasn't the first Chancellor after Palpatine. It was a split term between Bail Organa and Mon Mothma. Anakin and Padme were a power team for the Republic and Jedi, and they made everything work out for both groups. Their marriage remained secret, but Luke and Leia grew up with perfectly normal lives. They knew that their names were Skywalker, but it was enlisted in their schools with the last name Nabiri to dissociate them from the Chancellor and Jedi Master. It was a weird way of life, but they were set up the way they needed to be. Both were junior representatives, one for Coruscant and the other for Naboo. It was a little tricky, but on their birth certificates, it just kinda worked out. Regardless, as the Jedi looked like a healed state, there was one individual within the halls of the temple who was left out of such radical healing. He was promised a seat in the new empire, and for 20 years, he hoped to have a seat in the galaxy that was saved, and he never received one. Sindralic, still the current battle master, didn't rank up his guards, so Grand Inquisitor was left to his own devices. Violam was his name. Side note, it's not actually his name, but I'm going to start calling him that for this video, and maybe more if you like it. And it was a name he had not heard for decades. Temple guards removed their identities, and he had none anymore. Because he refused to betray the Republic and the Jedi without help from Palpatine, he sat in silence for 25 years. This ate away at him, but he didn't avoid doing anything. He simply used all of his time for his skills. With Skywalker remaining a staple of the High Council, and Master Kirik Infilla becoming the new Master of the Order after his brash vow, Violam was stuck with powerful Jedi sitting all around him. Mace had gone to the expansion zone for the Jedi Order. With Crimson Dawn crumbling after Maul's capture on Mandalore, the Jedi were actively capturing what little remained and disintegrating it. There was another footnote in the history books of the galaxy, a mini-war with veterans of the Clone War who dismantled the crime rings of the Outer Rim. The Republic was golden, but it still had a lot of work to do for those devastated Outer Rim worlds. The clones were all retired and living good lives, but the Republic military had to maintain the balance of the Outer Rim. The Jedi were slowly setting up more outposts as well. Violam, on the other hand, spent the last 25 years, especially, learning everything he could. His desire was to be a true contender. He learned what he could about the Sith, and dedicated himself to their ways. But first, he would need a student. The Temple Guard had prepared everything for this moment, and while there was interest in ripping Maul out of the Mandalorian sarcophagus, it wasn't until a couple weeks ago that he learned Maul had actually died. He was given two choices, change or die, and he chose the latter. They gave him the assisted death route because he refused to reject the darkness. The Jedi had given him multiple chances, taken care of him for years, and he just refused to join the light. After about 20 or so years, they gave up. That's why Violam didn't know. So he had another option, and he planned on breaking her out of prison on the day that he was ready to. He believed in the Sith way, and he planned on being the reason they returned to the galaxy. He'd be the first Sith since Palpatine, and he would rebuild their order, but it needed to start with a message. Since he'd been sitting in frustration for nearly 3 decades, he wanted his chance for revenge. His objective was hitting the training grounds on Yavin 4. Most training grounds were filled up with a master or two, a couple knights, and mostly students. The reason he wanted to target one of these locations was because it would send a message to the Jedi Council. He would not make himself present again afterwards. He just wanted to strike and disappear, let the Jedi know that they weren't alone again, and rebirth the rule of two. Balance was temporary, and their grip on the galaxy would disappear. Inside the High Council chambers, Anakin sat with his two closest friends. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were both masters on the council. Kenobi had trained Gunji because he yearned to train another, and Ahsoka had instructed Katuni as well as another after her. Now they were simply enjoying their lives. Obi-Wan and Ahsoka were well aware of Anakin's family, and they were planning out the twins' birthday parties. They were obviously the only 3 in the room because they were talking about this. Obi-Wan planned on getting Luke and Leia a really cool set of matching art pieces. This was the life. As they were sitting here, they received a transmission from Master Windu. He informed them that the new outpost on Hypori was complete. They could start moving new members to the location as soon as they were ready. Ahsoka looked over and explained that Master Bosha was ready with their peers. Anakin nodded, as Windu thanked them all, before informing them that his team was preparing to move to Solus to begin their next setup. Regardless, Anakin would still go to Padme's residence when he wanted to sleep, even though he had his own room inside the temple for when he lost arguments. Luke and Leia lived in the same apartment, but they were still working full-time. The only reason they hadn't moved out was because they were junior representatives. Once they got official roles, they would be given their own official apartments in the Senate District. It was the perfect life. On the other side of the city, at the same time, Republic troopers were slaughtered by a red lightsaber. The individual tore through the security of the Republic military complex and opened up Barriss Offee's cell door and told her she had 2 choices, join or die. Because she hadn't seen freedom since she bombed the Jedi Temple, she took the first option, not even realizing what she had gotten into. Despite Violam priding himself on his brilliance, he didn't even frame the attack on the military complex as a Jedi act. He went in with his black Sith uniform, not even thinking twice about it, and killed everyone. Jedi investigators under Master Infilla's command would be at the complex long after the fallen Temple Guard left with the traitor Padawan. Kirak checked on the crew of the location to see if they were alright, and there were 34 casualties, 29 of them being deaths. He was very disappointed that they hadn't seen this coming, but how could they? The Temple Guard was a hidden role. No one could see their faces, and they hid all their essences, so they were like ghosts, usually never seen by the Jedi inside the temple, simply floating around, raiding and protecting. Sindralic preferred it to stay like that. Once they learned it was a temple guard, the temple was locked down, and the council was activated to begin an investigation. But it was also very clear that this specific temple guard did not return to the temple. Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan did thorough checks on each of the guards before a distress signal hit Coruscant. Yavin 4's training temple was under attack. Skywalker rushed out, with Kenobi and Tano following closely behind. Out on Yavin itself, a group of pirates paid off by Violam marched on the temple. The pirates arrived shortly before Violam and Barriss did. He tried to tell her what he wanted her to do, as he did bring a spare lightsaber, one belonging to Master Katri, that he dug up. He gave it to her to use, believing that she would have deep-seated resentment for the Jedi. But the more Violam talked about this mission, the more Barriss started to fear him. This was a full-power Grand Inquisitor, someone not limited by a Sith Lord or his apprentice. Violam was able to train as much as he needed, and worked as hard as he could to find his own strength. When they landed, he stepped out, seeing an array of pirates rush towards the training grounds. It was the middle of the day, so a couple of students were already killed. Barriss told Violam that this wasn't right. He couldn't do this, and he ignited his lightsaber, He had already bled the weapon before breaking her out of the complex, as he told her that she had two options: join or die. She looked at the Jedi who were locking down the temple and told him that she refused to join him. He blasted her with electricity as she wheezed in pain, until she was unconscious. He told her that she would be the last to survive, and she'd be blamed for all of this. The pirates weren't nearly as equipped as the clones would have been 25 or so years before this. They were good enough. Viola walked up behind them and demanded that they break the doors down, but they couldn't. The Jedi properly barricaded themselves inside the temple. They were also fighting back. Due to the low numbers of knights and masters, there were defenses across the temple, like sentry turrets and explosives. Luckily, they got them online and were rushing the children up the side of the temple on the inside. The pirates had surrounded the facility, so the Jedi were going to escape out the top and descend the outside and rush into the forest. The few knights were preparing the children as the Jedi Master held the gate. Once the pirates eventually, after several hours, broke in, thanks to Violam's help, they were shot at by the turrets. They fired back, but the Jedi Master stepped up, fending off these insurgents. His elder brother, Ima Gun Di, died facing down an overwhelming horde. Misa Gun Di stepped up and prepared to challenge the fallen temple guard, who was clearly in the lead of this operation. Their sabers clashed. Misa ducked and parried Violam, who used all of his power to shove the Jedi Master over the stairs, giving his pirates a chance to ascend the stairs and hunt the remaining Jedi. But they were already sneaking out the other side. Outside the temple, Barriss woke up. She could hear blaster fire and she could hear lightsabers clashing. She rubbed her head and looked out over the fields. She could see a couple dead younglings and the clashing of a red and blue lightsaber. On the building itself, she could see the younglings escaping down the building, while the few knights were blocking the exit, cutting down the pirates as they made their escape. Misa could see the children moving away from the fight above, and so he continued to fight weakly. He stumbled and fell, catching himself each time as Viola felt pride with each of his strikes. Misa knew that, like his older brother, he was gonna die too, but he was prepared to sacrifice his life for his students and for the future. Viola was extremely powerful as he swept his saber up, tossing Misa's from his hand. This wasn't a part of the act anymore, he was using this act as a distraction. He had lost. Misa stumbled back and prepared to meet the Force, and as Violam's saber dropped, it was stopped by the Force. He turned back with rage in his eyes to see Barriss, holding out a blue lightsaber with her other hand outstretched. He felt rage rise within him as he twisted back and swung aggressively at the former Jedi. She ducked out of the way, rolling and throwing the Force towards the Sith, and launching him into the wall. Misa grabbed his saber and got to her side, as Viola rose, igniting his crimson blade once more. He saw from the corner of his eye the children rushing away, and told them that their young would perish too. They rushed in. He attacked, using all of his skill to sneak his way in between each of his opponents, bashing Barriss away, who was only working off her basic muscle memory, which wasn't much. Misa was keeping her steady as a starship wheeled around behind him, and out from the vessel landed Skywalker and Kenobi, who ignited their sabers and rushed in. Obi-Wan was going to the high ground to save the knights, and Skywalker launched his hand forward, throwing Violam back into the wall, as he told Barriss and Misa to go and save the younglings. Ahsoka landed the ship and exited to do the same. Violam rose to his feet and swung in at Skywalker, who jerked his neck back, avoiding the strike before using his hands to punch and sway. Violam tried getting the kill in, and with the ignition of Anakin's saber, he fell into two pieces, almost instantaneously. Kenobi above started a rout for the pirates, and before they could get to their ship, Anakin used the Force to crush the vessel, trapping the pirates and promising them a life of imprisonment for their actions here today. Violam's attempt at making a strike against the Jedi was misguided, but without Palpatine's leadership, he may have been stronger physically, but mentally, he was without true understanding. His death would be a nothing, simply a faceless temple guard fallen down the path of darkness, longing for something he would never have. Thanks to the Yavin 4 temple defenses, the trio of Jedi were able to get from Coruscant to Yavin in due time. While Anakin believed the others would have survived, it was still good to be here in time, but this also meant he'd have a long file to report on. On the bright side though, the trio could be back to Coruscant for Luke and Leia's birthday. They would bury the young who perished, imprison surviving perpetrators, and reinstate Barriss Offee as a Jedi if she wanted. Ahsoka and Barriss had a long talk before the trio returned to Coruscant. Barriss was good at heart. Her actions were wrong in the moment. She was a confused young adult when the temple bombing happened, and she made a bad choice. She had served her time. Anakin would reinstate her as a Jedi Knight, and she'd be stationed here on Yavin 4. Her actions today proved her capable enough to serve the Jedi and be trustworthy in the eyes of the Order. And Violam's death, the Sith would finally go extinct. It would be the mission statement of the current Jedi Order to properly educate the Jedi on how to reject darkness. This message would resonate galaxy-wide for the Jedi. The lives of those around Anakin would continue to do well. Luke and Leia would eventually become senators for Coruscant and Naboo. Even though it technically wasn't legal, no one needed to know that. Anakin would become Grand Master before his eventual death. But the work and changes he made to the Order, with Ahsoka, Obi-Wan, and even Barriss by his side, would live long past his life, as they would remain integral pieces of the legacy and lineage of the Jedi Order. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Jack Silver, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Schmoobs, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rose Bird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Priormark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Ban, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Jenny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Unlink66, Bamina Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fordo's Lazy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, the main three first names, Dark46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. So, little whirlwind there, intended intentionally. I really wanted to go from this council session to shifting 25 years in the future. I thought it would be just thought it'd be a little bit of a different way to approach it. The idea for Mace was kind of just him kind of tricking Anakin in the story. Like, the idea is Mace is like, alright, I'm not going to get you to sit in the council chambers. I might as well make you do something. And it does help out, technically, like, just to double check. But it was kind of fun to just send Anakin off gallivanting while the Jedi Council was able to do what they were able to do. I also wanted to kind of display the Jedi Council being a council, having the ability to fight off Palpatine because they're counselors. While also, inversely, in the 25 years in the future, it was fun to have Grand Inquisitor go back and become this villain of the story, where he's trying to keep the Sith idea alive, where he doesn't have the strategic mindset that Palpatine had to really get him through. And so that's why he falls flat without having any real true leadership. I think he'd be much more talented. Obviously, against full power Anakin, not really going to do much, but, you know. So, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.